The bridge between seasons. The bridge appeared on the day James turned 50. Not that he was celebrating. 50 felt less like a milestone and more like evidence, proof that half a century had passed while he'd been busy planning a life he'd somehow never gotten around to living. The milestone he'd imagined reaching with accomplishments and wisdom felt instead like standing at an unmarked junction, looking backward at a path he barely recognized and forward into fog. He'd driven north without a plan, leaving behind the birthday dinner his girlfriend had organized. She meant well, but they both knew the relationship was ending. Leaving behind his apartment full of expensive furniture that didn't feel like home, leaving behind the job that paid well but demanded everything except enthusiasm. The road wound through mountains, and James followed it simply because it went somewhere he'd never been. That seemed as good a reason as any. He almost missed the bridge. It wasn't marked on his GPS, and the small dirt road leading to it looked more like a turn-off than an actual route. But something made him slow down, made him turn, made him follow that narrow path through increasingly dense forest until the trees opened onto a clearing. And there it was, a stone bridge, ancient-looking, arcing over a ravine he couldn't see the bottom of. But what made James stop his car and get out wasn't the bridge itself. It was what was happening on it. The bridge was changing seasons. On this side, where James stood, it was autumn. The trees around the clearing blazed with color, red and gold and orange. The air was crisp and smelled of wood smoke and decay. Leaves scattered across the ground in drifts. But on the other side of the bridge, it was winter. Snow covered everything. The trees were bare, their branches dark against a grey sky. James could see his breath, fog in the air, could feel the temperature dropping as he approached the bridge's first stones. He should have been frightened, should have questioned his sanity, should have gotten back in his car and driven away from whatever impossible thing was happening here. Instead, he stepped onto the bridge. The first step was autumn, leaves crunching under his feet, October air cool but not cold. The second step was late autumn, the leaves thinner, the air sharper. The third step brought the first hint of winter, frost edging the stone, his breath visible, the scent of snow approaching. James looked back. Autumn still blazed behind him. He looked forward. Winter waited ahead. And the bridge. The bridge was a pathway between them. He took another step, and another. And somewhere around the middle of the bridge, something shifted inside him that was more than just the changing season. He was young again. Not physically. His body was still 50, still carrying the accumulated weight and wear of 5 decades. But emotionally, mentally, he was 25, standing at his first real job, interview, terrified and excited, full of plans and ambitions, going to see Caroline, his Caroline, before she became his ex-wife, for their first date, believing, truly believing, that his life was going to be extraordinary. When had he stopped believing that? The memory faded as James took another step, and a different moment appeared. He was 30 now, holding his daughter Emma for the first time, the weight of her in his arms, the impossibility of her tiny perfection, the overwhelming love mixed with terror. This creature needed him, depended on him, trusted him absolutely. He'd been a good father, James thought. At least he'd tried to be. But work had demanded so much time, and Caroline had been better with the daily stuff anyway, and Emma had grown up mostly seeing him tired, distracted, promising next time, until next time became never. Another step, another season of his life. He was 38, signing divorce papers, trying to make it all sound logical and mature and mutual, when really it was just two people who'd stopped seeing each other somewhere along the way. Caroline wasn't angry. That was almost worse. She was just done. And James couldn't even argue because he was done too, had been for years, had just been too busy or too cowardly to admit it. James stopped walking. He was standing in the exact middle of the bridge now, equally far from autumn and winter, surrounded by a season that was neither, and both. His life was playing out around him in moments he'd lived but never fully experienced, never properly acknowledged. The bridge wasn't showing him the seasons of the year. It was showing him the seasons of his life, and he had to walk through all of them to get to the other side. "What is this place?" he asked the empty air. A voice answered, not from any direction, but from everywhere and nowhere. A crossing, a reckoning, a chance to witness what you've walked past without seeing. Who are you? No one. Everyone. The voice of hindsight, maybe, or just your own mind finally paying attention. James looked down at the bridge beneath his feet. The stone was old, worn smooth by countless footsteps. How many people had walked this bridge? How many had stood where he stood now, confronting the seasons of their lives? "What happens if I go back?" James asked. "If I walk back to autumn instead of forward to winter?" "You can't. Time only moves one direction. You can visit the past, but you can't return to it." "Then what's the point of this? What's the point of showing me what I already know I lost? Did you lose it? Or did you just not notice it while you had it?" The words struck something deep. James thought about all the moments the bridge had shown him. Emma as a baby, Caroline at their wedding, his first apartment, his first success at work. He'd been there for all of them, had lived through every single one. But had he really been present? Or had he already been looking ahead, planning the next thing, treating each moment as a stepping stone rather than a destination? Another step forward. He was 42 at Emma's high school graduation. She was giving a speech about overcoming challenges, and James was checking his phone, half listening, mentally preparing for a conference call he had scheduled for later. Emma glanced at him during the speech, saw him looking at his phone, and her expression flickered, just for a moment, with hurt and resignation. He'd missed it at the time, but the bridge was making him see it now, making him feel Emma's disappointment, making him recognize how many times he'd made her feel secondary to whatever else he had going on. "I'm sorry," James whispered, though Emma couldn't hear him, though this was just a memory, a moment already lived and lost. Another step. He was 47, having dinner with a woman named Rachel, who would become his girlfriend. She was telling him about her day, about a student who'd finally understood a difficult concept, about her love of teaching. And James was nodding, making appropriate sounds, but thinking about a project deadline, about quarterly reports, about anything except what Rachel was actually saying. He saw it clearly now, the moment she'd realized he wasn't really listening. The small sigh, the slight withdrawal, the beginning of the pattern that would define their relationship. Rachel trying to connect, James being physically present but emotionally elsewhere. Another step, another memory, another moment of absence disguised as presence. James wanted to run, wanted to sprint the rest of the way across the bridge and escape this brutal inventory of his failures. But his feet kept moving at the same steady pace, forcing him to witness, to feel, to finally acknowledge what he'd been avoiding for 50 years. He reached the 3/4 mark of the bridge. Winter was close now, snow beginning to dust the stones, cold seeping through his jacket. And the memories shifted from past to present. Here he was yesterday, at the birthday dinner Rachel had organized. She'd invited his friends, the few he had left, and Emma had driven 3 hours to be there. They'd sung happy birthday, and everyone was smiling, and James had felt nothing. Just gone through the motions, cutting the cake, making jokes, pretending to be having a good time while feeling completely hollow. Emma had taken him aside later, asked if he was okay, really okay. And James had said, "Fine, just tired." Brushing off her concern, because actually talking about the emptiness would have meant acknowledging it, would have meant admitting that he'd spent 50 years building a life that didn't actually satisfy him. The memory faded, and James stood in winter. The far end of the bridge was just ahead, but he couldn't see what lay beyond it. Just trees and snow and a landscape waiting. "What's on the other side?" he asked the voice. "That depends on what you choose to see now. The bridge shows you where you've been. What you do with that knowledge determines where you're going. I can't change the past. I can't get those moments back. No, but you can change how you move through the moments you have left. You can choose to be present, to pay attention, to stop treating life like a waiting room for something better that never arrives." James took the final steps slowly, letting the full weight of winter settle onto him, cold and quiet and stark, but also clean, clear, a season for rest and reflection and letting things die so new things could eventually grow. He stepped off the bridge and onto solid ground. Winter surrounded him, snow-covered pines, a sky heavy with clouds, air so cold it hurt to breathe, but the cold felt real, felt present, felt like the first genuine thing he'd experienced in years. Behind him, the bridge stood unchanged, still spanning the ravine, still shifting between seasons. But when James looked at it now, he saw it differently. Not as a trap or a punishment, but as a gift, a chance to see clearly, to recognize the patterns he'd been repeating, to choose differently going forward. He pulled out his phone. No signal, as expected in these mountains, but he typed a message to Emma anyway, knowing it would send when he got back to civilization. "I'm sorry I wasn't there. Really there. I see that now. Can we talk? Really talk? I want to be better, want to try." Another message to Rachel. "You deserve someone who listens, who's present. I want to be that person. Will you help me learn how?" The messages sat in his outbox, waiting. James pocketed his phone and looked at the winter landscape. He could stay here, could explore this season, could sit with the cold clarity it offered, or he could head back, get in his car, return to his life. But not the same life, not the same patterns, not the same absence disguised as presence. James chose to sit, found a fallen log, brushed off the snow, and sat down. The cold bit through his jeans, but he didn't move. Just sat and looked at the winter forest and thought about the 50 years the bridge had shown him. So many moments missed, so many people half heard, half seen, half loved. So many days treated as obstacles to get through rather than gifts to experience. But the bridge had also shown him something else. Every single one of those moments had been an opportunity. Every conversation with Emma, every dinner with Rachel, every sunrise he'd driven past without noticing, they'd all been there available, waiting for him to choose to be fully present. And they still were. Different moments with different people, but still available, still offering the same choice: be here or be elsewhere, pay attention or stay distracted, live deliberately or drift through days on autopilot. The choice had always been his. The bridge had just made him see it. Hours passed. The winter light shifted from grey to greyer. James sat and watched, making himself notice every small change: the way snow collected on branches, the sound of wind through pines, the absolute silence beneath the wind, the feeling of cold becoming numbness, becoming almost warmth as his body adjusted. He was paying attention. Finally, after 50 years, he was truly paying attention. When he finally stood, stiff and cold, but clear-headed, in a way he hadn't been in decades, James walked back to the bridge. He half expected it to be gone, dismissed as a stress-induced hallucination. But it was still there, still spanning the ravine, still shifting between seasons. He didn't cross it again. Didn't need to. The bridge had shown him what it needed to show him. The rest was up to James. He walked back through the forest to his car, drove slowly back down the mountain, noticing things he'd missed on the way up. A hawk circling overhead, a creek running beside the road, light breaking through clouds, turning everything briefly gold. The messages sent when he hit cell service. Emma responded first. Yes, I'd like that. Really like that. Rachel took longer, but eventually, I'm willing to try. But James, this has to be real. Not another project you commit to and then abandon when it gets hard. I know, James typed back. I'm learning to be present. It's harder than I expected, but I want to learn. He drove home, to the apartment that didn't feel like home, but maybe could if he actually paid attention to it, actually made choices about how to live in it rather than just existing there. The next morning, on his first day of being 51, James woke up early, made coffee, and instead of immediately checking email or news or any of the usual distractions, he sat on his balcony and watched the sun rise. It took 23 minutes from first light to full daylight. James watched every minute, noticed how the colors changed, noticed how the city woke up, lights turning off in windows, cars beginning to move, noticed the way his coffee cooled while he wasn't paying attention, and then chose to pay attention to that too, to the temperature change, the shift in flavor. 23 minutes of pure attention, 23 minutes of being fully present. It was a start. Over the following weeks, James practiced presence like a skill, practiced listening to Emma when she called, not planning his response while she talked, but actually hearing her, practiced sitting with Rachel without his phone, without mental task lists, just being with her, practiced noticing his surroundings, the small details he usually walked past. It was hard. His mind wanted to wander, wanted to plan, wanted to be anywhere except right here. But James kept coming back, kept choosing attention over distraction. And slowly, things changed. Not dramatically, not obviously. But Emma's calls became longer, more open. Rachel relaxed, started sharing more, started trusting that he was actually listening. The apartment started feeling less like a way station and more like a home, as James made small changes, actually considered what would make him comfortable, rather than just buying whatever looked appropriate. His job was still his job. He couldn't make himself passionate about it through sheer force of will, but he could make himself present during meetings, could actually hear what his colleagues were saying, could treat the work as something he was doing rather than something he was enduring. And on weekends, James started driving north again, back to the mountains, back to the bridge. It was always there when he looked for it, though he suspected others driving past wouldn't see it. The bridge existed for those who needed it, and James still needed it. Not to cross it again, once was enough, but to sit near it, to remember, to check in with himself about whether he was staying present or slipping back into old patterns. The bridge became his meditation, his reminder, his test. As long as he could see it, could acknowledge the seasons it showed, he knew he was still choosing attention, still choosing presence, still living deliberately instead of drifting. Years passed this way. James turned 60, then 65. Emma got married, had a child. James was there, really there, for both events. Holding his grandson for the first time, he remembered holding Emma, remembered the terror and love. But this time, he didn't let the moment slip past. He stayed in it, feeling its full weight, its full gift. Rachel became his wife in a small ceremony that was everything a wedding should be. Present, intimate, true. They said vows they'd written themselves, promising not perfection, but attention, not forever, but right now, not a perfect relationship, but a present one. And when James retired, not because he had to, but because he chose to, because he'd saved enough and had things he actually wanted to do with his time, he thought about the bridge, about how it had shown him autumn sliding into winter, the season of decline and ending. But winter wasn't the end. It was just another season, a time for rest and reflection, for letting some things die so others could grow, for stillness and presence and paying attention to what remained when everything else fell away. James spent his retirement learning things he'd always meant to learn. Photography, actually seeing landscapes instead of just looking at them. Meditation, practicing presence as a formal practice instead of an accidental gift. Woodworking, creating things with his hands, staying present through the careful work. And he visited the bridge. Once a month, he drove north, found that small dirt road, and sat near the span of stone that had changed his life by showing him his life. Sometimes the bridge showed autumn and winter, the seasons of decline. Sometimes it showed spring and summer, the seasons of growth. It shifted according to some pattern James never quite figured out, and he stopped trying. The lesson wasn't about understanding the bridge, it was about understanding himself. On James's 75th birthday, Emma and her family came to celebrate. Rachel made his favorite meal. His grandson, now 20, asked James what wisdom he'd gained in 75 years. James thought about it, thought about the bridge, thought about 50 years of absence, followed by 25 years of presence. The most important thing, he said finally, is to notice, to really notice. Every day offers 1,000 small moments, and we walk past most of them. But the ones we stop for, the ones we actually see and feel and experience, those are the ones that become our lives. His grandson nodded politely, not quite understanding, but he would, eventually, when he hit his own crisis, his own bridge, his own moment of reckoning. And maybe, James thought, he wouldn't need to wait 50 years to learn the lesson. Maybe James's presence now, his attention, his choice to be fully here for his family, maybe that would teach by example what the bridge had taught him through confrontation. That night, after everyone left, James and Rachel sat on their porch in comfortable silence. The kind of silence that comes from being truly together, not needing to fill every moment with words. James held her hand and noticed everything. The weight of her fingers, the warmth of her skin, the way she leaned slightly toward him, the sound of crickets, the smell of night-blooming jasmine, the last light fading from the sky. He was 75, winter of life, objectively speaking. The bridge would call that his season now. But James didn't feel like winter. He felt like spring, like someone just beginning to bloom after a long dormancy, like someone finally living the life he'd been given instead of the life he'd been planning. The bridge had shown him the seasons of his past, but the present, the precious, irreplaceable present, that was his to shape with every moment of attention. He gave it, and James gave it everything, every day, every moment, every breath. That was the gift, that was the lesson, that was the bridge's final teaching. Life wasn't found in the past or future. It was right here, right now, in the choosing to notice it. And once you learned that lesson, every moment became a crossing, every breath a bridge, every heartbeat a chance to be fully, completely alive. James sat on his porch until the stars came out, holding his wife's hand, noticing everything, living deliberately, finally, at last. Better late than never, better present than absent, better now than not at all.